Welcome to this week's episode of Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, as always, Stephen Patton, joined by my dear friend and co-host Jake LaQuire. It's continuing to get hotter in North Carolina. We got a lot of news as we are in the slow season, and we are moving rather slowly as it's getting hotter. What's been new with you? Any new programs you've been on, Jacob? I know you started something this week.
Yeah, so trying to get in shape, before football. So obviously been cutting out all the bad stuff, but this past week I started doing like a second workout, like an evening walk or something. And yeah, it's been way hotter. It was like 7:30 last night when I started. When I got back, my whole shirt was like drenched. So obviously I need to be in better shape and it needs to cool down. So hopefully both of those things can happen over the next couple of weeks, couple months here, but I don't think it's cooling down.
No, we're heading right into the peak of the heat, which is why a lot of the guys need to get kind of prepared, not only mentally but physically, because it's going to be a drain. These mini camps, these practices, training camp, and the couple of dates that we're looking at for the report dates. Training camp for rookies starts on the 19th of July, and for the veterans, it'll be the 23rd of July. And like you talked about last week, it's kind of common knowledge at this point. We are no longer in Spartanburg. Training camp will be held in Charlotte at Bank of America, so that'll be extremely exciting. It'll allow more, I think, draw, especially for us as fans in Charlotte, to go see them practice more often. That we don't have to go drive an hour to go see our favorite team practice. So I know we made it once last year. We'll probably make it a couple times this year. Is there anything else you kind of want to touch on before we get into the meat and potatoes of this episode?
Yeah, I do feel bad for the South Carolina fans. Obviously, it's been in Wofford, I think, since the team's conception, right? Even during the COVID
Yep.
year, I think it was in Wofford. So obviously, feel bad for them. But I do think, like you said, if it is indeed in the stadium, because last year it was at a college, there were multiple fields, so I'm not sure how that's going to work out. But if it's in the stadium, I think that's going to be really cool. But yeah, let's just get right into the actual content of the podcast. And this week, like in the Panthers part, like you said, not a ton of news going around other than like the training camp dates being reported. So we kind of looked at the depth chart before we hopped on, and we're like, what positions do we like? Well, we like a lot of the upgraded stuff we did in free agency in the draft, but there's still a couple positions that are lacking, I think, adequate depth. Like there's obviously enough people for training camp, right? But when you take those camp bodies away, who's going to be on the field on Sundays? And I think the first position for me that worries me just a little bit is corner. Obviously, we lose Dante Jackson in a trade to get Deontay Johnson. Still think that was a win for us. Like we swapped late picks and got a true number one, or at least a serviceable number one for Bryce Young. That's a win. But then that leaves a kind of a hole at that corner two spot. Aside from J.C. Horn, you bring in Dane Jackson, who I believe Dan Morgan helped advocate to draft when he was in Buffalo, and it looks like he's the leader in the clubhouse there. But after that, it's like Troy Hill, 1 year deal. He was good for us, but on the older side, right? And then Deshaun Jameson and Boodle, who are both young corners who had their flashes last year, but not really established players per se. So that's still up in the air for me. What about you?
Yeah, I think corner out of the three positions we're going to talk about are like it's a position of need, but if nobody gets hurt, I feel
Lost you
really
for a second,
comfortable.
Steve.
Can you hear me now? I'm still here, so I think we're good at the 4 minute mark. Um,
Steve, you are muted, but and your
can you
camera's
hear me now?
off. Your camera's off as well, but yes, there's like
All right,
a
am I back?
you're back. There's like a 30
All right.
second gap. Start at like 3:40. Oh, we'll just remember that.
Okay,
But yeah,
gotcha. Yeah, no,
but yeah,
this is. I've had to give a lot of the controls over to Jacob because my Wi-Fi has been spotty at my apartment. So hopefully this is the first and last time it happens this episode, but I doubt it. To talk about the point on the cornerbacks, not the position I'm most worried about, but it is definitely up there in terms of concern. When I'm looking at the depth chart, if everybody stays healthy, I'm comfortable with Dame Jackson and J.C. Horn being the starters. But they start going down. You're leaning on Deshaun Jameson. You're leaning on, like you said, DiCaprio Boodle. And then you have this older Troy Hill and Chu Smith Wade, who we drafted. So pretty much an inexperienced guy, a veteran, and just it's like a whole bunch of hodgepodge. The positions that have me concerned, and we'll stay on the defensive side first, it's the edge position. We are dealing with a lot of injuries already there. DJ Wanham's coming off an injury. Clayvon Chasen's dealing with an injury. And when we kind of rolled out mini camps, it was Jadeveon Clowney and a bunch of like first, second year guys that don't have a lot of experience. And so you're wondering in a 3-4 scheme if we're going to really have that outside linebacker presence and if we're really going to need the interior of the defensive line to kind of play their part. Because at nose tackle, we're going to have a guy like Shai Tuttle or Ashawn Robinson, and then the ends are going to be obviously Derek Brown and the mixture of Shai Tuttle, Ashawn Robinson. So those three guys along the interior, and I think some of the rotation that we have there, I'm comfortable with. It's that outside linebacker position that has me a little bit worried.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Like you talked about at minicamp, it was just a slew of injuries or people recovering from injury. We saw DJ Johnson get carded, I believe, the first day of minicamp. Um, Dave Canales said it wasn't too big of a deal, but they just wanted to err on the side of caution. And then you have guys like Amari Barno, who's going to be in his third year coming up, hasn't shown a ton there. And from there, it's just been guys we brought in. Clowney, DJ Wanham, you mentioned Clayvon Chason. There are not a ton of we'll say experienced bodies in this room that are healthy right now. So I think we're going to see a lot of like some of our interior linebackers being sent on blitzes, kind of like how we did with Frankie Louvu on plays. I think Trevin Wallace, for him to see the field early because he's going to be behind Shaq, who's back and healthy. Josie Jewell was paid a decent amount of money, and he's a good linebacker. So I don't know if Trevin Wallace will see the field like immediately with his athletic profile. He'll be able to get on the field for like blitzing snaps and stuff like that. But yeah, I think edge rusher is a much more of a concern, that position group, than the corner for me. And then this is kind of an interesting one, wide receiver. Some people think we did enough. I still think we could bring in some like actual receivers, but at least we upgraded, right? Like I talked about, we brought in Deontay Johnson in the trade, drafted Xavier Leggett or Leggett, I believe is how it's pronounced. They're capable. I think we've upgraded the room to not being worst or second worst in the league, but I still think we're on that back 8, back 10 receiving group.
Yeah, and I mean, trading for Deontay Johnson got my hopes up. I was like, okay, so we understand this is a position of need. We go out, we fill the interior of the offensive line. We feel confident about the offensive line. But for me, it was like, we need to keep taking stabs at wide receiver in the draft. This is something we talked about last week prior to the draft, what we had in mind when it came to building this room. And I mean, a lot of people are getting hyped on the fact that we just signed Dawood Davis, that we brought in guys and veterans like David Moore and Cam Sims. We still have Mike Strahan, who I think caught Bryce Young's longest pass of last season. And outside of Jalen Coker, who comes from Holy Cross and has an interesting profile and could legitimately take a leap as an undrafted player, none of these guys move me. These aren't guys that are really going to be vying for positions in terms of starting. It might be like one of these guys gets the last 6 spot, but like in terms of Deontay Johnson, Adam Thielen, Xavier Leggett, Jonathan Mingo, and Amir Smith-Marset, I don't think any of those guys, Terrace Marshall included, are going to hop those 5. So you're really playing for that last like roster spot. And that's where I think it comes into conversation, especially with what happened on Instagram a day ago, I believe, with Brandon Ayuk's girlfriend kind of recording him talking to Jaden Daniels and saying, like, the 49ers don't want me back. And so obviously a lot of people have connections. Oh, Jaden Daniels and Brandon Ayuk played college ball together. Maybe Washington goes out and get them. And if they go out and get them, like, they are going to be a scary offense, in my opinion. But there's other talks of like, okay, well, Detroit could be interested if they said Jamison Williams and a pick for him. I think a team that should be in the running, Dan Morgan, are the Carolina Panthers. I think we need to be on the phones, and if that means we got to move another player, a couple future picks, I'm down for it. I'm here for it. I think adding a guy of his caliber would really change the landscape of Bryce Young and this offense going into the fall.
Yeah, I agree with you there. When you look at it in a vacuum, what we sent to get the two big receivers this offseason, we ended up trading a second for Leggett. Like we swapped the pick and added like I think a fifth or a sixth rounder. We traded a sixth and Dante Jackson for Deontay Johnson. So I don't think there's been a ton of investment that precludes you from going after Brandon Ayuk. And this is a good segue into around the NFL. Brandon Ayuk is different. I think we both regard him as a top five receiver, or in top four, in fact. When we did our skill player list, really good. I'm willing to pay him the contract he wants, which I believe is 30 per year, right around what Amon-Ra St. Brown is getting. And to me, Brandon Ayuk's a better player, but I can understand fans being hesitant, be like, "Oh, we traded for two receivers. Why would we get a third one?" If we need to see how Bryce Young really is. If we really want to give him a chance, Brandon Ayuk out there, Deontay Johnson out there, Leggett out there, I think that's as good a group as you can ask for, considering what we had last year. And I don't know, I would give a pretty fair amount to go get him, like a second and a fourth, throw in one of our lower end receivers or something like that. I'd be willing to go out and get him. And I think it says a lot that the 49ers drafted a first round receiver this offseason as well. So maybe they were prepared for this, and maybe they truly don't want him back at that price value that he wants.
Well, Brandon Ayuk, one of his biggest traits, and it's something that you look for in wide receivers, is his ability to get open. I believe he led the NFL in kind of the open score this past year, or he was up there in terms of being one of those top guys. And having that trait, and you look at the two wide receivers the 49ers drafted, exactly to your point, Ricky Pearsall and Jacob Cohen, two of the better wide receivers out of this draft class and getting separation. So I think you are right. The 49ers don't like that price tag, especially knowing that they're going to have to pay Purdy in a couple years, and they already have a lot of expensive players on both sides of the ball. It just makes sense almost to recoup as much value as you can by trading that kind of player. So we'll see what kind of happens. We saw Deebo Samuel kind of getting upset about contract extensions a couple years ago, and then he got signed. So who knows? We don't know exactly what's going on in some of these contract negotiations and what will eventually play out. But if he is available, the Panthers need to be serious, because I think adding him, you can make up for some of the holes on defense, because you're going to be putting up a ton of points and you're going to allow Evero to drop seven constantly and put more pressure on that offense to rip off bigger chunks and not just slowly, methodically move their way down the field. So, doing that, I think, helps some of those holes on the other side. But moving on into the around the NFL that you talked about, some of the NFL investigations wrapped up in regards to the start of free agency. Philadelphia was not penalized for their, I guess, talks with Saquon Barkley prior to him signing. But the Falcons lost a fifth round pick, were fined $250,000. The general manager, Terry Fontenot, was fined an additional $50K for the Kirk Cousins tampering. And so my question to you, Jacob, is this fair? Is this too steep a price? Is this not enough of a penalty? Like what's the theme here? What's the thought process? Because we've seen the Patriots lose like picks in the top three rounds for doing different things over the past couple of years, or getting a 4-game suspension, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, as a Panthers fan, I think it's way too low, right? They should be losing their first round pick the next 5 years or something. But I think what the crux of this is the NFL is saying, hey, please tamper. We're not going to do anything to you, all right? A fifth round pick is nothing. And if you read the tea leaves about the potential Chicago Bears and Falcons trade during the draft, they could have recovered it if they just traded down one spot. Probably should have, since the Bears already took Caleb Williams. But who knows there? Like if you're losing a fifth round pick and 250K, I don't think fines like this come out of your salary cap. I think it just comes out of like your earnings, right?
Yep.
So like that's nothing. It's the same thing with the NBA, and I think it's more egregious in the NBA because there's only 60 picks, so you're taking away like the 60th or 59th player's chance to be drafted. I think that's
Mhm.
really bad. I think there should be a different penalty there. But if that's what the penalty is going to be to get probably the best free agent QB on the market this offseason, do it, right?
Yep.
Like, what do you have to lose? A fifth round pick? Terry Fontenot has to give 3 days earnings to cover the fine. Like, if this is what it is, tamper. Dan Morgan, tamper.
So, but we talked about this, I believe, last week when it happened, and the big takeaway was who were the other suitors for Kirk Cousins outside of Minnesota? And
Nobody.
that's where it's like, okay, if nobody else was on the phones talking about Kirk Cousins, what were the implications of this? This wasn't the and I understand this was more commissioner kind of overriding, but this wasn't like the New Orleans Hornets at the time trading why am I
Chris
blanking out?
Paul.
Chris Paul to the
Yeah.
Los Angeles Lakers to go play, and like that being a like an unfair advantage. It wasn't like there were multiple suitors like there were in the Deshaun Watson trade, where it gives one leg up compared to another team that would have been interested. So that's my only takeaway. I think had there been more of a market for Kirk Cousins, this could have been a bigger penalty because I think some
Yeah.
other teams would have had some skin in the game. So we'll see in the future if the tampering kind of goes up or down in terms of the price tag. But like you said, if this is what you have to pay to tamper and make sure you get your guy, tamper away. Or in the case of the Panthers, Tepper. But moving forward, the other thing that kind of happened between last week and this week, Trevor Lawrence got paid. And this was one of the quarterbacks that we talked about would get his bag. I thought that maybe he could push past that 55, almost get close to 60. But the big thing holding Lawrence back is he doesn't have a lot of like regular season accolades. He doesn't have those resume boosters in terms of playoff appearances or playoff runs like a guy like Joe Burrow or Lamar Jackson have when they get these bigger deals. And so his deal comes in a couple years later after the Joe Burrow deal, and it's the same exact price. So from an inflated value standpoint, it's not really any different. The cash flows are a little bit lower than Joe Burrow's were in terms of like the first 2 years, and then they kind of even out at the back end. Um, what were your kind of takeaways? I don't think this is an overpay. I think this is a fair market price, and I really think the way the Jaguars are building their team, they're honestly set up to be an underdog in the AFC. I know a lot of people are talking about the Texans in their division, about CJ Stroud, maybe even the Titans being kind of sneaky, Will Levis and their new head coach in Callahan. But I really like Trevor Lawrence and what the Jags are building.
Yeah, I don't think it's an overpay at all. We've talked about for a while now, even before the QB episode that we did, that we're both pretty big fans of Trevor Lawrence. I myself am a pretty big fan. I think the guarantees on this deal, looking at it, it's definitely not as it's not the market mover that Burrow and Herbert's. I don't. It wasn't simultaneous, but they're like a week apart from each other. Were so yeah, you're right there. It didn't really push anything forward, and I do agree. Like how quickly the perception of the Jags has changed. Right, halfway through last year, they were 8-3. They had a
Mm-hmm.
96% chance or whatever it was to make the playoffs. Obviously, they floundered, right? And it all falls loose. And CJ Stroud has a really great rookie season and takes the Texans to a playoff win. So we're sitting here thinking like, oh, now it's the Texans, and oh, the Colts almost made the playoffs with Minshew. So if Richardson's back, they'll be there. Levis is on the rise. They're giving him all the old receivers he needs. So I don't know. I still believe in Lawrence, and I've been on this since the middle of last season. Doug Peterson start calling plays again, and things they'll look a lot better. But I don't know. I think the Jags, if they can figure it out, they're a strong team to beat because I think the defense played decent last year. They upgraded there based on like a preparation standpoint from what we've heard about how they wouldn't go over certain things in practice or meetings. I think Ryan Nielsen will help a lot there. They had Eric Armstead, I believe, on a 2-year deal this
Yeah.
offseason. So their D line should be stout if
It's
Trayvon
nasty.
Walker comes along and like plays like the first overall pick like he is. They just paid Josh Allen. So that D line should be fine. I think they're going to have Tyson Campbell, the pretty good corner, extended soon. So that I think that's good there. They've invested some in their offensive line as well. It stuff should be coming together, but we'll have to see because the Texans, despite all the stuff we're talking about, the Texans also made a lot of improvements, and I think they're a bit younger in the important positions as well.
Yeah. And from a cap standpoint, when we talk about the other three quarterbacks in the division, they're all on rookie contracts. They were all
Right.
drafted last year. So they're going to be cheaper than Trevor Lawrence. Now, granted, some of the larger cap hits aren't going to happen until a couple of years from now. But to put in perspective, if we look at this from like an inflated APY standpoint, because the cap is always going up, and we look at this deal in retrospect and compare it to what those inflated values would be, Trevor Lawrence comes in as the 10th highest paid quarterback from an APY standpoint, and he's the seventh highest in guaranteed money. So he's not like top five, top three. This isn't something that's going to break you. You know, the cap just keeps going up. I like that they signed Gabe Davis to, I wouldn't say like a minimum deal, but he's not terribly expensive. They draft Brian Thomas. They already have Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram. You add in the fact that some of these offensive linemen that were on suspension or rookies last year are kind of growing together, kind of building some cohesion. And so if everybody's able to take a step, I really think they're going to be underrated. And like you said, they started the year 8-3. They took the Chiefs down to the wire. They beat the Bills. They had some wins on their resume that weren't just, oh, they play in the AFC South. It was impressive stuff. They were staying in pace with the AFC, and they just kind of fell apart at the end of the year. And stuff like that sometimes happens. And so I'm very interested to kind of see the rebound from it, but I'm excited to see where it's going to go. We talked about Brandon Ayuk kind of saying that like the team doesn't want him. T. Higgins actually signed his extension with it, that the franchise tag, and I'm shocked by that. I really think he could have forced the issue and gotten traded and gotten paid this offseason. What do you think from his mindset? Do you think Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase are like, hey, like ball out this year, and whether we pay you or another team pays you, like let's go try to chase a ring? Like is that what's going through his head, or is he just kind of done with all the saga and just wants to play football?
I think it's more the second part. I think he realized, hey, this is the Bengals front office that I'm talking to, right? We saw Jesse Bates do this, didn't work. He got tagged twice, right? 2 years in a
Yep.
row, and then free agent to the Falcons. We saw their O lineman Jonah Williams do this, didn't work. I think he signed a 1 year, and then, or no, they moved him to the right side, and now he's on the Cardinals. So the Bengals they're a bit stubborn when it comes to this stuff. I don't think they're going to give in unless like it's the quarterback like Burrow they had to. So I think he's just like, all right, I can make. I don't know what the franchise tag is, but it's relatively high for a receiver this year. I can make this year, and then maybe at the deadline they'll deal me, or next year I can be on my merry way, because I don't think they're or I don't think they will tag him twice. They might be able to, but if a Jamar Chase extension is coming, I don't think they're going to want to commit a second year tag and that extension to the receiver room, especially when they've drafted a couple young guys recently. But I think he just wants to play now, and we'll see what happens there. Back to the Lawrence thing, the last point that I want to bring up is who's next, right? I think if Lawrence's representation maybe thought this through a bit more, they could have waited for the Tua deal or a Jordan Love deal. I think the Jaguars benefited from getting this done earlier because Jordan Love, he's on a really, really cheap deal. Tua is going to get extended. Dak Prescott, we've talked about him at length about how he has a no tag, no trade clause. If the Cowboys want to keep him, they have to extend him this year. Otherwise, he's probably going to say, "I'm out of here. I'm going to go play for the Giants." You see him in the Yankees jersey. I think throwing out the first pitch the other day.
Yeah.
He already wants to be a Giant, I guess. So I don't know. I think Lawrence's agent could have waited a bit longer, but I think getting the security is pretty good. I guess my last takeaway
You
is that the
bring up
Jags
Tua,
won the
and
first game.
I'm going to pause on that. Do you think
Oh,
Tua gets more than Lawrence?
did you see what Jared Goff got?
Yeah, I'm asking you. Do you think Tua, because Jared Goff has been to two conference championships. He's been to a Super Bowl in his
Mm-hmm.
career. He was the first overall pick. There's a lot of accolades in Goff's favor in terms of like his resume. I don't see that with Tua. Granted, he's been extremely efficient, but he's also had one of the best supporting casts from like a wide receiver standpoint.
Supporting cast from a team and coaching standpoint, Goff has been living in heaven since he's entered the league. Oh, outside of his rookie year, don't want to
Yeah.
throw that rookie year on him, but I don't know. See, I think when I saw what Goff got, I think that
But he
kind of
got
opened my
53
eyes.
mil. He got 53 APY. And that's what I'm
On
asking.
but
Does
on
Tua,
a second team though, like I don't know. I think Tua is going to get a maybe the same deal as Lawrence. I don't know if he pushes it. But
really? Okay.
he's. I think he's going to get a big deal. It might be 4 years instead of 5 because of the injury stuff. But I don't know. Just seeing that Goff deal, like I don't like. it's either you have a rookie QB that you feel good about extending, that's going to be your starter, or you have a guy you extended. There are no in betweens anymore. The in betweens are like Russell Wilson, who stinks now, but they're paying him the vet min, right? Because the Broncos are still paying him from when they extended him. You have Kirk Cousins now, which is I think is an outlier because the Falcons were so desperate to upgrade from what's his name, Desmond Mitter, Desmond Shitter, uh, that they were willing to pay that. And the guy that or where he did play before, Minnesota, rookie QB. There aren't a lot of middle ground QBs anymore. And if Mike it's Mike McDaniel, the head coach. If they feel like they can win with Tua, and in the regular season they've been able to, it's just I think a lot of stuff's fallen apart, like injuries and stuff in the postseason. If they feel like they can operate that system with Tua at a high level and get like make a postseason run, we'll see this year. Like I think this is the ultimate litmus test for him. But if they believe that can happen, they're going to extend him because like looking at Jared Goff, do you think that they could get a better QB in Detroit to take them further? Like when remember the Richardson draft, we were like, oh, Seattle could get a Richardson, Detroit could get a Richardson. Like if they thought that they could get a guy and stash him like that, I'm not counting Hendon Hooker because I was never a Hendon Hooker believer. But if they thought that they could get a guy like that, would they have extended Goff the amount that they
No,
did?
but like, so
No.
here's the thing that both the Seahawks, they traded for Sam Howell this offseason. They have Geno Smith. They are trying to plan for the future. We have not
Hmm.
seen that with the Lions. Granted, they didn't draft Hooker. They drafted
They did draft Hendon Hooker in
so
the third
they
round, I believe.
drafted, yes. I was thinking one of the other quarterbacks in last year's draft class, but they did not make a move up for Richardson, and they didn't take Will Levis. And for me, I think that's a mistake on the Lions' part because if they had been able to play out a rookie contract, they would be able to add another piece or two on either the offense or defense that could take them up a level, similar to what we've seen with the 49ers do on Brock Purdy's rookie deal. And to your point about Tua, my thing is I'm looking at their cap space situation because this is a team that's gone all out for Tyreek Hill. This is the team that went all out for Bradley Chubb and some of these other guys and paid some big monies to some big players. And they are negative $10 million against the cap next year. And Tua's not even on the books. He's on his fifth year extension this coming year. So you would have to restructure a lot of guys. You wouldn't probably be able to bring back half the team that you have right now. And so you're going to have an influx of just guys on vet min deals and rookies that are coming into the building. And then the following year, because you're going to have to kick a couple contracts down the line, you only have in 2026, I believe it's around $50 million in cap space. So the Dolphins' margin for error is really, really small. And that's where, when I go back and I talk about the Lions needing to draft a rookie quarterback, this is something the Dolphins need to keep on their radar. Whether they're trading for a younger quarterback that's going to cost a lot less, or if they're moving up in next year's draft and finding that replacement. But I don't know if $53 million for Tua is the answer.
Well, I guess I'll put it this way: the Saints are what negative 70 every year,
Yep.
something like that. And then they
But
went and
what's the
signed Derek
roster?
Carr. They went and signed Derek Carr to like 40 million while they were the most red a team's ever been. And then it worked, or 40 million per year rather, and it worked out in their favor. You can
Do you
always move stuff
their
around. No,
but
no,
but
like
their dead cap next year is almost 90 million. They keep kicking it down the road, but they have all these older players that are eventually just going to have to retire. Like
right,
that
but
is how the state of the Saints
they
are.
sneakily won 9 games last year, right? And I wouldn't say the Saints roster is a good roster, but they were still able to get it done. So like I don't know. Like I think well, I mean, look at the Dolphins O line. Like look how bad that was. They were able to make it work. Like I think what McDaniel's able to do is mask a lot of things, and if they can do it at a high level with well, we'll say replacement level players, then I don't know. Maybe you could do it with a paid quarterback with replacement level players. I don't know, but yeah, that's just my final point. And then the only other around the NFL, I saw you try to sneak past it, but we got to talk about the Ravens purple helmets that came out today. I really like them. I think they make the color rush uniforms look good. But yeah, that's my thought on it.
Yeah, no, the uniforms look nice. My hot take on that, or perfect take, since we are perfect takes. would be that they're better than the Minnesota Vikings jerseys that dropped. I know the icy whites, a lot of people were like, oh, they're so fresh. I didn't think they did enough with the helmets. I think the Ravens helmets are very unique.
Hmm.
I like the purple, kind of the all purple. It's really cool.
And
It's not
and
as
it's the alternate Raven, the one that's like
Mhm.
looking at you with the red eyes. Yeah,
Exactly.
it's
Yeah,
pretty
no, and
cool.
that's what I'm saying. Like it's unique from that standpoint. The purple's a little bit lighter than their kind of like blackout uniform, and I like that from that standpoint. So they accentuate a color that's really not really anywhere else in the NFL. They're kind of the Mace Windu team.
And
If
they have the
we're looking,
gold stripe down the middle too on the new helmet, which is neat because you don't really see the gold. The only gold you see is like in the trim
Mhm.
of their jersey. So I think it should be pretty cool.
Yeah, no, it'll be nice to see. All the stars that they have on both sides of the ball are going to look very drippy. And speaking of Baltimore Ravens, we have a couple in our top 10 this week. And the position groups that we're going to kind of go over are the second level defenders. So your linebackers, your cornerbacks, your safeties, how we would rank them. We're taking into consideration their contracts right now. So we have a lot of rookie cornerbacks or rookie defenders kind of on this list because there are a lot of good players kind of in that department. And we're looking at it from the scope of the next 2 seasons that we're going to have. So if we have this player for the next 2 years, are they going to be a needle mover based on the criteria that we've set forward? So without further ado, our first two are exactly the same. So they were flip flop last week. I had Micah Parsons and then Miles Garrett. You had Miles Garrett, then Micah Parsons. This week, we're synonymous. We believe the top two guys kind of in this department are the same. And I'll just kick it off and say Patrick Surtain. And the Panthers passed on him on the JC Horn draft. We passed on Justin Fields and Patrick Surtain. So that kind of stunk for us. We saw what Ejiro Evero did with Patrick Surtain in Denver. Made him look like an all-pro corner, a guy that was just locking down star wide receiver after star wide receiver. And when you have a guy that can take away a third of the field, it makes such a difference. And I think you're in agreement with this that he's just the perfect combination of size, physicality, instinct in terms of just knowing where he needs to be. And I obviously he loses a couple reps here and there, but that's going to happen when you go up against the best. To me, he is really starting to make a case that he could be kind of like the next Revis Island. And I know that's kind of jumping the gun, especially since the next guy that we have is a New York Jet, but that's just the vibes I'm getting with just how he plays defense.
Yeah, he's the best corner in the league, in my opinion. And it helps that he's on a rookie deal. We talk about all these extensions, right? I think he's going to be the guy to bring the corner market up. I think if you look at like growth rates for positions, the corner market's probably the slowest or one of the slowest right now. Maybe like punter and kicker and stuff too. But I think with all these young rookie corner, not rookie contract corners, Sertan's going to be the one to bring it up. You brought up how like physical he is and how he's able to man up with people. He's also a technician too. This guy had to go up against guys like Judy, Devontae Smith, Waddle, Henry Ruggs in practice every day at Alabama. And it's clear that that helped mold him into a better player for the NFL. We did pass on him. You're right. We also passed on Micah Parsons, a guy you mentioned a couple minutes ago. So kind of
Well,
bad
Micah Parsons
process.
coming out. Micah Parsons coming out
He had
was
some stuff. Yeah.
it was the stuff, and then he was also slated as kind of like an inside
Mhm.
linebacker. He wasn't the outside linebacker. I think if he was that outside linebacker pass rusher, he might not have even been there at the Carolina pick. And I'm just being honest about that. But yeah.
Which is interesting because he was an edge rusher in high school too. They
Yep.
just repositioned him at Penn State. But I'm not going to fault Penn State for having like story or like moving their linebackers around. They know linebacker is probably the best linebacker college producer of linebackers into the league ever. So they know their stuff there. But back to Sertan, I just think he's the perfect like ideal corner for today's NFL. He can stay with the more physical receivers, like the bigger guys, like the Julio Joneses of old. But he can also stay with guys like Tyreek Hill because he's able to move like his feet and his hips simultaneously well. Just the best in the league. There's nothing much more I can say about it. And number two, you mentioned it earlier, Sauce Gardner. I think he came into the league with an excellent reputation. Didn't allow a single touchdown when he was in coverage in college, and then in the league his first year, he had a rough moment. I believe it was his second game. I think it was versus Stephon Diggs. But other than that, he's really been the lockdown corner we've expected. I think he might be the new Revis just because of what is it, Gotham green and white, I think is the Jets colors. But he's really come into his own going into his third year. He won defensive rookie of the year his first year. And I just think he's all over the field, and he's going to be a guy like Surtain that's going to help bring the corner market up. And I really don't think it gets talked about enough because the Jets' D line rotation is really good, and the rest of their secondary pieces this past year have been good. But Sauce is a big component in how that defense is able to run.
Yeah, I think the biggest knock on Sauce, and it's the reason he's below Sertan for me, is when you look at some of the advanced numbers, and you can throw with J.C. Horn up here. The issue why J.C. Horn is not up in conversation with these is because he's not available. Is Sauce Gardner has a tendency to grab players, get a
Yeah.
little handsy more than he should, and he usually allows a little bit more separation than some of the other guys. So when you factor in all that, you just wonder if, okay, if Sauce ever loses a step, is his technique going to eventually get to a point where that's not going to matter? And so that's the biggest concern that I have with Sauce is that there's some things that he still needs to refine in his game. Overall, he can match up about with anyone on the field. Does a great job kind of taking away that third of the field that we talked about earlier. So there's a reason why he's at number 2. This is a guy on a rookie contract who is definitely adding a lot of surplus value for the Jets right now and kind of gives them those shades of Darrelle Revis. But at number 3, this is where we kind of deviate. Your third is my number 4 guy. But for me, this is my first linebacker off the board. I believe both of us have 2 coming off the board in the top 10. I think both of them actually go before kind of like the top 7, top 8. And for me, it's Fred Warner. We both obviously grew up kind of in high school watching Luke Kuechly and what he was able to do. We both remember in our younger days watching John Beeson and Patrick Willis. I have a
Brian
couple.
Urlacher.
Brian Urlacher. Well, I was about to say Dan Morgan, Ray Lewis, Brian Urlacher, some of those just like dogs and what you could do. But the evolution that came with guys like Luke Kuechly and even Bobby Wagner when he was younger, I see so much in Fred Warner. And that's your ability to play coverage as a linebacker, just as it is to make an impact in the run game and setting guys. And they are the quarterbacks of the defense. And for me, when I see Fred Warner's vision, when I see the instinct, when I see him, what he's able to do in coverage, I just, for me, the instincts, the smarts, the leadership, the physicality, it all jumps off the page. There is a picture of him where he goes completely airborne, I think trying to make a tackle on Kyron Williams against the Los Angeles Rams a year or 2 ago. And it's just, it goes to show that not only he knew where the ball was going, he's able to make a play halfway across the field. And that kind of stuff is just like, it's hard to teach. That's not something that just like easily translates from the film room to the field. You have to just be a cut above everybody else. And so for me, after those top 2 cornerbacks, even though the linebacker market is a little bit more underrated, even compared to the safety and corner market, I think the value he adds overall to the defense is just, it's unparalleled.
Yeah, he's on the list for me. He's number 6 for me, so not too far. I think you nailed or you hit you hit the nail on the head of the. I can't even say that right now. That's such a
Head of
tough
the
mistake.
nail, head of the nail. Or
Right
no,
there.
no, yeah.
You nailed it. All right, you nailed it. I think prior to Kuechly, what we thought about linebackers as, and this was especially true in the run-heavy early 2000s era, is this guy's a run fitter. All right, he's gonna diagnose the different type of zone run, read, or whatever, and he's gonna go get the guy. And then Luke Kuechly came in. He did that too, but he was able to impact the game in coverage a lot differently than guys like Urlacher or Morgan or any of those guys you talked about, and Bobby Wagner as well. I think Bobby Wagner was even a little bit better in coverage. He was able to drop a bit more and or be a bit more lateral in his coverage. A guy like Fred Warner, I think, is the next step of Kuechly. I don't think he's as good pre-snapper diagnosed, but I think
No.
his ability to get across the field so quickly and like cover such a large area is super underrated. We talk about how good the Niners defense is, right? They've had guys like Bosa. Their D line's been stout. They've had Eric Armstead, Javon Hargrave now. They've had a strong D line. They've also had some decent corners and secondary pieces, but Warner is really what makes it work alongside Greenlaw, Drake Greenlaw. I think both of those guys are really the engine of that defense. He's a bit lower for me because cost effectiveness And I like another linebacker who's I think is ascending a bit right now, who I'll have a bit ahead of him. But at number three, I have Trent McDuffie, the Chiefs corner. He was phenomenal this past season, played super well in the Super Bowl, and I think them losing L'Jarius Sneed kind of covers up the fact that Trent McDuffie is really, really good, and he has been since he was a rookie. You could argue he's the best rookie in his class. I don't know if I'd go that far because that is a class with Gardner in it, but he's really, really good. His ability to move inside and play from the slot, I think, is something that needs to be talked about more because you see guys like Debo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, who he matched up against in the Super Bowl, operate really, really well out of the slot. He was able to blanket him for most of the game. Obviously, Ayuk shook free on a couple of them. Luckily, Brock Purdy can't see, and he missed him. But he's really, really good, and I think that's why we both have him in our top four here. I don't want to spoil your fourth player, but he's really good.
So you reference, is he the best kind of player from his draft class? We
I
obviously have
said
Sauce
I said
higher.
corner. I said corner.
Oh! I thought you said
Yeah,
best
yeah.
player. Yeah. So
Mm-mm.
yes, obviously we both have Sauce above him. I think what we saw from him this past year and even the year before in his rookie season is his ability to play man coverage when you have these Spagnola blitzes and you're going, okay, we're trusting you guys on the back end. You got to do your part, and we're going to try to get to the quarterback and just wreak havoc. I don't know how much of it was L'Jarius Sneed being able to line up and take away sometimes the number one option on the perimeter. And obviously, offenses are trying to get a lot more in the middle, trying to get guys in the slot and kind of mismatch opportunities. But for me, I want to see now that L'Jarius Sneed isn't on the team, are we still seeing the same Trent McDuffie? Is this the same guy that's locking guys up down in and down out? Because I feel like if he starts kind of being the main dude, and he gets a couple things where he feels a little bit stretched or he feels like he has too much on his plate, we may not see the same player that we have seen these first couple of years. I think he's a great player. I think there's a lot to love about his tape. That's just my question, and the reason why I don't have him any higher is because, yes, he is on a rookie deal, but he's not asked to do some of these things where you're following the number one wide receiver, you're playing out on the outside. And slot corner, I think, is one of the hardest positions to play in football. I think there are certain elements in the Chiefs' defense and how they have prioritized investing on that side of the ball the past couple of years that has benefited him in his development.
Yeah, I agree with you there, and I think it's certainly going to pay off because I think the trend we see more and more now in the NFL is it used to be slot corner was a lesser position, right? It was you need your two guys or you need one guy to line up on Calvin Johnson or whoever, Andre Johnson, and just cover him on that side, and then the slot guy can cover the shifty, speedy receiver. But we're seeing more and more nowadays. One, offensive play callers moving people around. I think of Cooper Cup, right? A guy who can play X, but a lot of the time is in Y.
Amon Ra.
I'm on Ross St. Brown as well. I mentioned the Triple Crown winner, but he works too. Shout out Amon Ra for getting paid. But I think, and this is something Evero does with JC Horn, who is on my list a little bit later. You're going to be able to, or you're going to have to need to be able to move around the field more. And look at Horn; he's able to cover a guy like Kyle Pitts, whereas the Falcons receivers aren't as deadly, I guess, just based on Pitts's athletic profile. So I think McDuffie's ability to step inside shouldn't be used as, and I'm not saying you are, but it shouldn't be used as a slight against him in an evolving NFL where past concepts and players are being moved across the field. But I agree with what you're saying that he
Would
has
you pay
benefited.
him like the guys we've talked about? Would you pay him as a Patrick Surtain, a Sauce Gardner? We've seen other guys that
No,
kind of play more on the outside, like a Jair Alexander, and that might be a fringe one, but Denzel Ward, Jalen Ramsey, and that's the only thing I want to take away from it is that I think he is extremely valuable, but I don't know if he's in that tier.
no, no, and that's fair. Like if I had to put it into like tiers, I guess it'd be Sertan, Sauce Gardner, and then the rest of the corners. It's kind of like how it was Ramsey, and then the rest of the corners. Then Jair kind of snuck up towards the top there, but it's been Ramsey since he's been in the league. Obviously not now because he's getting up there in age, but yeah, I think McDuffie just for me heads the next group of corners and next group of rookie contract DBs. All the defensive backs on my list are still on their rookie deals. That's one of the things I took into account here. But I just think he's at the top of that next group. We do need to see it without some of the auxiliary help in L'Jarius Sneed, though, this upcoming season. And you talked about Fred Warner being, you've done your four now, Surtain, Sauce, Fred Warner, McDuffie. My fourth is actually Roquan Smith, the Baltimore Ravens linebacker that they traded for 2 seasons ago, and I believe subsequently extended him right after that trade or in the offseason of that trade. At the time, I'm like, what are you doing? This is a really big extension. But seeing how he has been able to operate in Mike McDonald's defense the past 2 years, you hear a lot of people, and Nate Tice especially talks about the spine of their defense with Matt Abuke, Roquan Smith, Kyle Hamilton, who is spoiler alert number 5 for me. But I think Roquan Smith, once they traded for him, that spine was really able to be formed, and he's able to unlock so many things for them. We talked about how Fred Warner is able to do so many things in terms of run fitting and in coverage. Well, Roquan Smith isn't as good in coverage, but man, he can blitz the hell out of a quarterback. He is an excellent blitzer. You can even line him up off the edge and rush him there, and he has such an impact there. And I think when you're able to do that alongside another good back end player in Hamilton, they also had Patrick Queen the past couple of years. But when you're able to move your linebacker just from his stationary point, sometimes drop him in coverage, sometimes have him play the run, but also sometimes rush the A gap, sometimes line him up over here and blitz because the Ravens aren't necessarily the youngest, fastest edge rusher group in the league. I think that versatility just makes him super, super valuable. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how the defense evolves this year without McDonald. I believe they promoted internally, but I'm really excited to see it. And I did say I had Kyle Hamilton 5th as well. Just go over him real quick. Best safety in the league, in my opinion. Coming out of that draft class, I thought he was the best player in that class. Looking at some more advanced numbers here, lowest passer rating allowed in the league, lowest yards per completion, 4 interceptions last year, 3 sacks. He returned 1 interception for a touchdown. So we talk about Roquan Smith's versatility there as a linebacker. I think on even further back end, Kyle Hamilton's able to do just as much, maybe if not a little bit more. I think the one thing he needs to work on is being a bit more fluid. That was my critique coming out of college for him too. Just open up your hips a little bit so you can cover the field, more of the field quicker. But other than that, he's got all the right stuff.
Well, I mean, it was, I believe, his rookie year. It was like a training camp the Ravens had, and you saw him it was like a little, almost like seam go out route. Kyle Hamilton kind of got twisted around, and some of the issues I have with Kyle Hamilton, even in the pros, is when he is playing man coverage. That's when he's the most suspect. And unfortunately for me, I don't have him in the top 10. I do think he is the best safety in the league right now. I do not have any safeties on the list. For me, I have my 2 linebackers and the rest are cornerbacks. And you spoke about Roquan Smith, and he's the guy for me at number 5. So we have some good representation for the Baltimore Ravens, which is kind of what kicked off this segment. And for me, the difference with Roquan Smith is Mike McDonald, not Mike McDaniel, Mike McDonald, the Seattle Seahawks head coach, and was prior to that the Baltimore Ravens defensive coordinator. Before that, he was the linebackers coach for the Ravens. And he was aware of guys in the room like Ray Lewis, Terrell Suggs, who kind of carried the torch for that franchise. And what he was able to do in kind of this new age NFL is kind of understand the importance of the linebacker position in the modern NFL defense. And so exactly like you said, midseason, the Ravens defense wasn't bad. They had guys like Patrick Queen. They had some guys on the outside like Marlon Humphrey. They had some guys on the defensive line. You felt pretty confident about it. And it's like, why are you going out and trading draft capital for a non-premium position? Well, the reason why is because, yes, he may not be as good a coverage player as a guy like Fred Warner, but he was a lot better than Patrick Queen. And so then that pushes Patrick Queen down to where he's covering a guy of lesser skill. And all of a sudden, you're just playing clamps on everybody, especially when you have Marlon Humphrey on the outside taking away the number 1. You have Kyle Hamilton taking away some of the middle and deep routes that are going on with the defense. And Kyle Hamilton can play in the box just like Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen. And so just all the different versatility that they had and being able to simulate pressures from that, I think is what just opened up the Ravens defense to be so dominant. But Roquan Smith was that missing piece. He was that catalyst. And I think him being that focal point, 2 years now, he's been all pro first team. This is a true star. And I think he is a difference maker. I think he is the leader of the Ravens. And if he were to go down, I think it impacts him a lot more than a lot of other players going down in that defense, including Kyle Hamilton, Marlon Humphrey, and Justin Matabuke.
Well, for sure, he's the one who unlocked everything, right? Like you said, he displaced Patrick Queen to have a less significant but still important role, and I think his ability to just be everything, like coverage, run fitter, pass rusher, just helped unlock everything there. Uh, and yeah, it's going to be interesting to see both how the Seahawks defense grows because they don't have a linebacker even close to Patrick Queen's
They
caliber.
could
Their
they could
linebacker
trade
room is
they could trade for Matt Milano or a guy like that. I've heard some
yeah.
rumors that they could be an interest for that. So we'll see.
So that one's going to be interesting. I think their safeties could also use a little upgrade as well. They ended up cutting both of their older safeties there. And then the Ravens defense, how that's going to work without Mike McDonald, who I think we both actually regarded as the number one overall play caller on both sides of the ball. It's going to be interesting to see. We talked about Kyle Hamilton as well. Number 6 for me, we spoke at length about Fred Warner. So give us our first new guy in a while on your side.
So my guy, and this is where
This
it gets
is
a little
your guy.
ballsy. This gets a little bit ballsy. He for me was my cornerback one in last year's draft class. And I thought he was proving it about a quarter of the way through the season and had a season-ending injury. Him and Matt Judon, I think, were true difference makers for the Patriots defense. And the guy I'm talking about is Christian Gonzalez, who was drafted out of Oregon last year. I thought he was the biggest fall in the first round last year. And for me, when I see how fluid he is, like you talked about with Kyle Hamilton, him being a little stiff in the hips, I don't see that with Gonzalez. I see a true X like caliber in terms of covering an X wide receiver, like a true difference maker. And I think he is going to be able to take away a third of the field. I think we're going to be talking about him in the conversations of a Sauce Gardner, a Patrick Surtain, that he is just able to clamp up dudes and it's not going to make a difference. And so you factor that in the fact that they still have Matt Judon, Christian Barmore, some of the linebackers and safeties they have there. I think the Patriots defense could be really special this year. We'll see. But for me at 6, Christian Gonzalez shows a lot of traits that as long as he can play all 17 games and he doesn't have this like injury bug, he is that kind of a rising star. And I know that's crazy because Devin Witherspoon went before him. But for me, the size, the physicality, the fluidity, his ability in coverage, I think it's all there, and he's going to put it together this first year with Jared Mayo and Drake May as a quarterback. I think the Patriots are honestly like going to be in the running for the AFC East division, not this year, but the following year.
I was gonna say if you say this year, I don't
No, no,
know,
no,
but
no, no. You have a lot of stuff going on this year, but I think between the cap standpoint for the Jets and the Dolphins moving forward, it looks rough. So it really just is going to come down to, I believe, the Bills and the Patriots in the next few years, and it will be Drake May versus Josh Allen, which will be extremely exciting because I think both share a lot of similar styles of play.
yeah, I'm not nearly as high on Gonzalez as you are, but I am still high on him. He's on my list. He's number 9 for me. Those first, I think it was 4 weeks of the season before he got injured. 2 of them it was like, okay, he's a pretty decent corner. 2 of them were phenomenal. I thought he was going to win Defensive Rookie of the Year. I believe that was a take of or like a tangential take of yours that he would like lead in interceptions or
It was
defensive
leading
rookie of the year,
interceptions. Yep.
something like that. And he was phenomenal. Like he looked like he was on his way to it. Excuse me. Obviously, season-ending injury. So hopefully he's able to bounce back. My knock on him coming out, I think I had him second. My second corner in that class. There are a lot of good corners in that class, Witherspoon included, but he got a little grabby after he got beat. But I don't think he showed a lot of that when he played in the pros this past year. So I think the sky's the limit for him. It's just I hope he doesn't turn into another J.C. Horn, where super physical, super talented corner coming out that's just hampered by injuries. But I think super good player for me. Going on to number 7, it's actually and I can see in the notes here they have a really similar color schemes, but I have Derek Stingley Jr. from the Houston Texans. He was in the same class as Sauce Gardner. He's actually drafted ahead of him, which was kind of a shock to some people. But if you go back to his freshman year of college, that was the year LSU like went crazy. He was a really dominant corner. Took a year off, came back, kind of mixed results in college, but in the league, I think his first year he struggled a bit. I know he missed time his first year This past year as well, he ended up missing, I believe it's 6 games. Yeah, but when he played, he was really, really good. Allows sub 50% completion, 5 interceptions this past year in 11 games. That's a pretty high number. Second in passer rating allowed. He's really coming into that number one corner that the Texans need him to be. Like if I were to look at the Texans depth chart, like any questions I would have would probably be, okay, is the secondary going to be able to hold up? With him in place, it is. I really believe in him going forward. Obviously, the Texans did. That's why they took him ahead of Sauce. And while he hasn't lived up to that expectation quite yet, I think he's on the way. And I think if he's able to string together a full season of this kind of play, we're going to see a guy with 7 interceptions, allowing less than half of the catches, low passer. Like that's kind of a hard one to judge in terms of passer rating allowed because there's not a ton of great stats for corners. But if he's going to continue to do stuff like this, I think he'll rise up our lists. And I think he's going to be in that group with Gardner, McDuffie, a couple of the next corners that are going to help move the market up when it's time to get paid.
Yeah, I think for me, I think Stingley would probably even fall outside my honorable mentions. I need to see him put it together. It's kind of the same concern with Christian Gonzalez. Had injuries coming out of college, was dealing with that kind of the start his pro career. Like you said, phenomenal stats last year, but he also was working with D'Amico Ryans, and they have some interesting pieces on that defensive line with Will Anderson and Daniil Hunter. And so it's always like, okay, how much is the pass rush setting up the secondary and vice versa? And I think he's a completely talented guy, but going back to my initial point, he's a little bit undersized. Like that's my thing is when you have some of these bigger wide receivers in the NFL that can really kind of just like manhandle and play you at the point of the catch, guys like DK Metcalf and AJ Brown and just guys of that caliber, I get worried putting a Stingley on him. Yes, you can be hip on him. Like you can be white on rice. You can be glued to him. But at the end of the day, if he can go up and win those 50-50 balls and make them 80-20 balls like T. Higgins says, then it's like that's where I get a little concerned. That's where I see like in those big moments, is he really going to be that playmaker? And maybe he proves me wrong this year. Just for me, that's my knock on him. I have Jalen Johnson here. For me, I thought he was a true X factor down the stretch for the Bears. There's a reason why I think they were either first or second in overall defense once they traded for Montez Sweat. And it was just because everything was starting to come together. They had all the pieces that they needed. They shipped out Roquan Smith, a guy that was more of a run fitter. They brought in a guy that I don't think is as good a linebacker. Why am I blanking out? I don't want to say Edmonds. Tremaine Edmonds. Yeah. I wanted to say Edwards, and I was like, that's not right.
They brought in TJ Edwards, too.
There we go, from the Eagles. So they did bring in a TJ Edwards. So those kind of linebackers, they fit more Eberflus's system. They added some guys on the defensive line that are really exciting. And I think Jalen Johnson deserves every penny that he got. So even though he is paid, he is on that second contract. I think he's young enough and still in a position to really impact the NFL and take away kind of that first read option for quarterbacks on the perimeter. So that's going to be a key factor down the stretch. Put up a bunch of good numbers, and I think as long as he stays healthy, he's going to make the Bears a top 10 defense and really help contribute.
Yeah, I think the Bears defense down the stretch was really, really good last year. Obviously, he's a big part of that. For me, looking at all it's linebackers, safeties, corners that we had to pick from, I saw so many good rookie scale DBs that anybody who has already gotten paid was honestly a disqualifier for me. I think the league is ripe with young corners and Hamilton too as a safety to where we can really, really take the contract stuff into account for once as like a decision maker. Like in some of the other ones, like, yeah, obviously Myles Garrett is going to be 1 or 2, or like obviously Justin Jefferson, this was before his extension, but obviously he's going to be the number 1 receiver. Whereas here, I think Jalen Johnson's really, really good, but some of the other corners that I have, we talked about Gonzalez, who I think is also really good, who's on the come up. My next guy, still on his rookie deal, that I think's played better when he's been on the field. And
when he's on the field, yes, I agree.
Yeah, but like I think, excuse me, I think Jalen Johnson, obviously, super, super good season last year, got paid for it. I think he was he 20 or 20 per, or was he 19 per?
I
on his
think he was
contract.
around 20. Let me look that up. Do
Hmm.
you want to highlight who you have at
Yeah,
number 8 in
I'll,
the
I'll
interim?
hop into I'll hop into number 8, and I gotta have a Panther on the list because we're a Panthers pod. It's J.C. Horn. When he's been on the field, and this is going to be the caveat for anything J.C. Horn related, but when he's been on the field, he's right behind Surtain and Gardner. Like in terms of his skill level, he's right up there. I think his second season where he played 13 games, lowest passer rating allowed out of every player in the league, but he only played 13 games that year. I think back
Hmm.
to the Seahawks game where it was we ended up winning that game going into the 12th man.
Are
He
we
was
talking about Pete
covering.
Carroll's comment?
No, I'm talking about the
Oh, you're talking about
interception
the
he had
play.
on
I
Geno.
know. I'm talking about the comment Pete Carroll made afterwards. But no, go on the interception first. I thought
No,
you were trying
I
to.
don't remember that comment, but I remember he's covering. I believe it's DK running like a little out to the side. He recognizes the route combination behind him, peels off, goes backwards. Geno doesn't even see him there. Interception. And these are the kind of plays that he's able to make when he's on the field. And he just hasn't been on the field. He said he switched up his training regimen in the offseason, so hopefully that helps. But we just got to see more of him. Like it, we just have to see more. And
Yep.
that's also I don't want to jump the gun, but my perfect take here is that we're going to see him play a career high in games, which is more than 13. So he's going to play at least 14 this year. But when he's on the field, and if he can string a full season together of what we have seen from him, he's shooting up the list to at least fourth. The next like when we do this next year.
Yeah, no, I think he'll be in conversation. He'll be closer to that contract extension, which will make things a
Mm-hmm.
little bit fuzzier there. But I think he absolutely, when he is on the field, his production garnishes like top 10 kind of status, and absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, he's put the production on the field when he's been there. My biggest thing is when we're looking at this list that availability is still a factor. And
Yeah.
so for me, the injury bug, he just doesn't make the list for me. He is on my honorable mentions. I do think he's a great corner. He doesn't have those concerns that I had with a Derek Stingley or even like with a Trent McDuffie of being undersized. This guy can match up with anybody, like you talked about earlier. He can cover a guy like a Kyle Pitts. He can be on the outside taking away your number one. And that's just a really special trait to have and a tool that you want in your toolbox as a defensive coordinator for Ezero Evero. So they go from Patrick Surtain to JC Horn is pretty great from that standpoint. Guy I have at 8 is Denzel Ward. Um, Cleveland Browns paid him. So Jalen Johnson got around 19 mil. I believe Denzel Ward got around 20 mil. Inflated APY would put Denzel Ward's contract kind of with Jair Alexander, Jalen Ramsey about being about 25 million APY, which is what we think Surtain and Gardner will probably get if they get paid in terms of 2024 dollars. And there's a lot to like about Denzel Ward. This is a guy that was a high end draft pick. He was, I believe, taken number 4 overall in was it the 2018 draft when we had Sam Darnold,
Yeah. Right after
Saquon
Sam
Barkley.
Darnold. Yeah.
Exactly, at number 3. And personally, I would rather have Denzel Ward. This is a guy that when he's had a couple injury bugs that have sidelined him for a few games over the course of his career. But this guy is a guy that, for the most part, can lock people up. He was that Ohio State product that we thought, and Ward was obviously highly touted, but this was kind of in the same grain that we thought.
Jeff Okuda.
Jeff Okudo, that he would kind of be there. And this is what's kind of turned me off about smaller corners. And I think Denzel Ward, he's not like super small, but just like being of that mindset that you can be a technique like Savion. And I think that there is some of that in line with Nate Wiggins out of Clemson this year. It just deters me when you're that little and not able to sometimes get your hands on it and be as physical with a wide receiver on the line of scrimmage. But overall, he's put the tape out there. He's a great corner. He's helped the Browns be the defense that they have been over the past couple of years. And I think he's going to be a big factor. And if this team can still make a playoff push in 2024.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. The only thing that I would add is we talk so much about what Myles Garrett is able to do as a pass rusher and in the run game. I think it kind of gets lost that Denzel Ward's a lockdown corner. Like you
He
said,
is.
he's not tiny, but he's a little on the smaller side, 5'11", 190. For reference, Derek Stingley's 6 foot 190, so right around the same size there. But
Yep.
I think Ward's proved it. I think early in his career, like you're talking about, he also dealt with some injuries, and that's what I'm hoping Gonzalez and J.C. Horn are going to be able to overcome and like be on the field full time. Because when he's on the field, that defense is humming. And yeah, I think the defense. We say this every year. On paper, they're like one of the best in the league, but he's a big part of that.
Yeah, no, and the guy that you have, oh no, we're both at number 9.
Hmm.
But I all this talk about smaller cornerbacks, and sure enough, at number 9, I have another smaller guy, and that's Devin Witherspoon. He isn't completely undersized. He was your number 1 cornerback in last year's draft class, and there's a lot to like about him. I saw a clip from Brian Baldwin,
Baldinger.
Baldinger. There we go. I did not want to pronounce the D for whatever reason there. He did a good breakdown earlier today from a Twitter clip I saw, and it was a simple fact that I think the 49ers were running like a inside slant with the outside wide receiver, and Devin Witherspoon, it was like a light bulb switch, and he realized Brandon Ayuk was coming over top, immediately dropped off the inside wide receiver, I believe it was Deebo Samuel, and Purdy threw it enough behind it. Had he led Ayuk, I don't think Witherspoon's making the play, but it was just a little bit behind him, and Witherspoon was able to break it up. He had the was it a pick six or a pick two against the I think it was a pick six against the Giants on a prime time. It was either I believe it was a Monday night game, could have been a Thursday night, but again, just showed these flashes of just playmaking ability. And there's a lot to love about that. I love his attitude from a cornerback standpoint. That's the kind of guy I want my cornerback room. A guy that's just talking smack. Like nonstop. Like I love that about Josh Norman in his prime and some of these other cornerbacks that just don't back down. Like they're trying to get in your head and play a chess match with you and be like, I can beat you not only on the field but just like verbally. And there's just a special trait with that. Reason why I love Steve Smith is he was able to dish it just as much as they could. And I think he plays the position the right way. He's on a rookie contract. Again, there's a lot to like about how he plays the game. And I think where we talk about Trent McDuffie being in the top 5, I think Devin Witherspoon, if he keeps putting up these performances and improving as a player, he's going to garnish that because he can play all over the field. And that is a scary prospect, especially when you have a guy like Reek Woolen on the other side. You're bringing in a Mike McDonald as a defensive play caller, and they have a lot of answers, I believe, on the defensive line that are going to open up a lot of possibilities for him to make plays.
Yeah, that defensive line improvement is going to be interesting. Re-signing Leonard Williams, they brought in Draymond Jones a year ago, and then Byron Murphy in the draft. So going to be an
Byron
interesting.
Murphy is going to be disgusting.
Yeah,
If he's healthy, that is going to be absolutely nasty.
you talk about Devin Witherspoon. Yeah, he's a dog, but he's also really, really cerebral. Like you're talking about, he's able to recognize concepts. How I was alluding, J.C. Horn was able to, and that's why like stacking up against my number 9. We already talked about him, Christian Gonzalez. I had Witherspoon as my number 1 because while he is a little bit smaller than what Gonzalez is, I think his ability to recognize and make plays quicker than Gonzalez and be less grabby kind of sold me on Witherspoon over him. But both of those guys I think are going to be good for a really, really long time. My final guy at number 10 was a rookie this past year. And I did say Hamilton was my only safety on the list, but Brian Branch, the way the Lions used him as a nickel corner and even moving him outside on occasion, I thought it was really interesting. He held up really well, despite them not really having a true number 1 corner going into last season. Branch held his own when they moved him on players like number 1 receivers. That is, he's more of the Swiss Army knife that I talked about with McDuffie. But like at Alabama, he did have experience playing the star role, playing safety. So I think what he was able to do this year, I think he ended up 3rd in defensive, maybe 4th. I think Kobe Turner showed up at the end there, but I think what he's able to do, or what he was able to do this past year, combined with his previous experience of being moved all across the field, is only going to help the Lions because I think they've still been searching for more DB help, and he's going to be a big piece moving forward for that DB room.
Yeah, no, and I think having consistency in that room, especially with the defensive play caller they have there in Aaron Glenn, is going to be pivotal. Having those guys that know the system, know how to run it, that can play all over the field is great. And I don't want to take anything away from Brian Branch. I think he's an excellent player. For me, I don't think he offers the value of like you can put him on a number 1 wide receiver and you know he's just going to take him away. That
Yeah.
is the beauty of some of the guys that we've talked about, or in the case of the linebackers, what they're able to do from a pre-snap diagnosis or just going out and making a play. that kind of stuff that I just don't think he's at that level. Do I think he's a valuable player? Do I think he's going to do phenomenal things in Detroit? Absolutely. He showed it in college. He showed it his rookie year. And I think that's only going to continue to pile up on his career. The surplus value will probably be gone on that second contract. But right now, excellent player. For me, I'm going Charvarius Ward at number 10. This is a guy I loved in Kansas City. I thought he was a pivotal factor in their 2019 Super Bowl run. Goes to the 49ers. He has been huge on their defense. I think when you pair him with a guy like Fred Warner and he can take away that outside number guy, it allows everybody else to feel comfortable in doing their job. So the only two guys I have from the same team, you have Roquan Smith and Kyle Hamilton on yours. I have Fred Warner and Charvarius Ward on mine. I love Ward's ranginess, cornerback skills that I like. I grew up watching Richard Sherman, Josh Norman, those kind of guys that were just so long and big and could just match that physicality. That's what I see with Ward. I think he's underrated in that department. I think you could put like a L'Jarius Sneed in this conversation. We'll see what he does in Tennessee. I'm curious to see what he does. If it's like a Josh Norman situation where Josh Norman looked great at the end of his Panther stint because he's in a system that really allowed him to be him. And then it's like now you're in this new system and you're asked to be the man. And it just kind of the bottom falls out, so to speak. But now that we've wrapped up the top 10, a couple guys on my honorable mentions, Kyle Hamilton, like I mentioned, first safety I would take. Just safety isn't a valuable position for me. J.C. Horn, going back to this, I completely forgot to tell this story, but you referenced that Seahawks interception. Pete Carroll was on the sideline asking, who was that? Like, who made that play? And he probably would have known had J.C. Horn been healthy for the couple of years at that point in his career. But that I thought it was funny because it was very much like the Urban Meyer with the who is Aaron Donald? Who's that guy comment. That was the vibes I was getting there. And I just thought it was hilarious. So I also do have Derek Stingley here. Like I said, Sneed's on my list. Jalen Ramsey, even though he is older, has an injury history. When he's on the field, and we saw it at the end of the last year with the Dolphins, he can be a difference maker. And then the other guy I'll mention is Reek Woolen. He sucks in the run game. I think he's bigger than Devin Witherspoon from like a height standpoint, but I would much rather have Witherspoon fitting the run than Reek Woolen. And I think that's just like the knock on him. Love him in coverage. Just don't think he's a guy that's going to step up and make a big play tackle in the open field that you sometimes need from these guys.
Yeah, and in the NFL, that's something you really, really need. He had a phenomenal rookie year, but kind of fell off last year, I think. He's in my honorable mentions as well. L'Jarius Sneed, both Denzel and Charvarius Ward, Jalen Johnson. So a lot of the guys you had, but they got paid already, so not on my list. Antoine Winfield Jr. for Tampa Bay just got paid as well. Jesse Bates also got paid. And then Talanoa Hufanga from the 49ers. I think he's really, really rangy on the deep third of the field. I think he's an excellent piece alongside Warner and Ward, like you talked about there. It's interesting that both of our linebackers were joined by other players from our list, like from their teams on our list.
Because I think they unlock each other. Like when you have that commander, but like on the outside, you have that taken away. It allows just so many different things to go on and allow other players like tertiary guys to step up and be playmakers. Because like nobody knew who Justin Matabuke was outside of like hardcore like NFL fans were until like last year. And it goes to show you that it's a ripple effect on defense when these guys are able to step up and do what they do.
Yeah, for sure. I think we're into Purrfect Takes now. I didn't allude to it. I flat out said mine earlier, but it's going to be that J.C. Horn will play a career high amount of games this season, which of course is more than 13. So 14, 15, 16, 17. Would say 18 plus, but I don't think the Panthers are going to make the playoffs. So we'll have to see there, unless he gets traded somewhere and they make the playoffs. But we'll see. I think this is the year he gets right. He's on a upcoming contract year. We picked up his 5th year, obviously, but he's the same draft class as Patrick Surtain. So like he could get extended, but I think he's going to have to put together a large sample size season in order for that extension to come in and get done.
Yeah, and I could see him getting, if he balls out, getting like Jalen Johnson money.
Yeah.
He's not going to get top of the line market because he hasn't been healthy. He hasn't been available, and there's questions about that. Now, when he's on the field, and we have said this about like 50 million times, we'll say it whenever we reference J.C. Horn, if he can be on the field, he's a difference maker. He's an elite playmaker. There's a reason why we took him number 8 overall. Great dude. He's joined by a fellow Gamecock this year in Xavier Legette, so that's cool that
And Clowney.
Carolina's. Yep, and we bring in Clowney, so we
And
might as
DJ
well just be
Wanham.
called the Gamecocks, so to speak. Are now the Carolina Panthers. So a lot of familiarity there. I'm sure South Carolina Panther fans are very happy about that. My take is the guy that went right after J.C. Horn, Patrick Surtain, is the guy who resets the cornerback market. Now, I talked about earlier the inflated APY of some of the top guys that had signed those top deals. It would be about 25 million APY this year. And I think that's exactly what Patrick Surtain's going to get when he negotiates. I think the contract extension that'll fall this summer. He's not doing anything, I believe, to hold out. It's just one of those things that when you have a playmaker of his caliber, he's an all-pro level guy. You want to make sure he's compensated. You want to keep him around. The Broncos, historically, they've had guys like Champ Bailey, Keep Talib. They have prioritized that cornerback position over the years and making sure that they have a lockdown guy on the perimeter. And I think he signs a deal worth 25 million APY. I think you said it pre-show. You wouldn't be surprised to see like a 125 over 5. I could see that. I could see 100 over 4. Whatever gets the job done, I think he's going to be right in that range, and he's going to kind of set that market and really set the precedence for what we'll see with a Sauce Gardner contract probably next year.
Yeah, I'm with you there. He's their best player, and you got to pay your best player, especially when it's a position that you need to have, like corner.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that like the hit rate is so low in the draft that when you have these guys, while it's not shown in their how they're paid, I think what they offer on the field is highly underrated. One thing we haven't really talked about, and it has been studied from like a statistical standpoint, is that coverage is a weak link system. So you could have this lockdown guy that is taking away a third, a half of the field. But if the guy on the other side of the field is a liability, it doesn't matter how good you're playing, the offense is just going to direct all their attention on that weaker side. So as much as we're talking about these guys and how valuable they can be, it really is about having a cohesive unit. And so when we talk about the Lions, like you said, having Brian Branch, trading for the Buccaneers corner, and I have just been awful with names. Carlton Davis, and I believe they drafted another guy this year. And so when you pile all of those on, it was Terrion Arnold they drafted, right?
And Ennis Rakestra from Missouri as well.
That's
both
right.
Both their first two were corners, like the Eagles.
So, and that's a whole concept, and the Eagles too. Understanding it's a weak link system and going, hey, we can't just have that one guy. We got to have a unit. And so when we talk about these, and I don't know if it'll be any more this year, but moving forward, maybe next year we do like top 10 secondary units as a way to kind of like understanding like, okay, yes, you do have this one bona fide star, but if the offense is going in a different direction, like, do you have the guys to kind of stop that and force the offense into mistakes and turnovers that you want to see? So that about does it for this week's episode.
Well, and I want to bring up something else there right at the end. You talk about the not as apparent value that a corner brings. Look at how the Rams were able to achieve success post Jalen Ramsey trade. Mm-hmm. Without that trade, they're not winning the Super Bowl.
No,
and this was already with the best defensive player maybe ever, like on the interior of the defensive line. But even then,
they also traded for Von Miller. They understood the need to get some of these premium guys. They are needed to make some of these playoff Super Bowl runs.
Mm-hmm. And then the other last thing I'll say is you brought up Aqib Talib, but it's a Panthers pod. You know what you got to say.
Yeah, fuck Talib.
Ice up.
Oh, ice up, son, ice up. Yeah, no. For me, I'm so pissed at Talib. Like he got dogged by Smith in that 2013 game. For me, it was the horse collar drags on Philly Brown that led to some of the concussions in the 2015 Super Bowl. So as a Panthers fan, he's a piece of shit, in my opinion. I side with Michael Crabtree and the chain fight all those years back. I think he's a dirty player when he's been on the field. But sometimes, like when you're competitive and you're heat of the moment, you do some scummy things. And so I don't want to take anything away from his career. He was a true number one during his prime. But Steve Smith definitely put him in his place. Before I get sidetracked any further, That about concludes it for this week's episode. Kind of got off into tangent. Talib is not my favorite, but next week we'll be going over our top 10 head coaches, and we got some spicy ones. And so I've been known to have some opinions about coaches in the past, and I will definitely continue to have those opinions in next week's episode. The following week we'll have general managers, and then we will start kicking off our division previews leading up into the season. So stay tuned for a lot of great content leading up into the season, get you ready and expectations set for this coming year. Should be a lot of fun. We're excited for it. And we should have a lot of guests this year. So stay tuned for those. They'll have a lot of good insights for you all. And until next week, we'll catch you guys then.
Yep. Keep pounding and ice up.